Before we begin the podcast, I just want to give you a heads up. There is a bit of a noise issue at the beginning in regards to who our neighbors were in the building next door. So it's a lot of commotion going on, but otherwise just hear past that. And from there, though, it's pretty calm and cool afterwards. There's no extreme background noise, but in the beginning of the video, you will hear a little bit of some background excessive noise. This is my first time around with this. Give me a bit of grace as I begin to improve this process, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. But real quick, how would you say your daily pain level was? Like right before we started working together?
Excruciating. I would say it's unfair to put it at a 10 just because I know that there's possibility for things to hurt worse. But I would put it a very, very solid 9.5. I'm glad to be able to walk again. Like both of this guy, really, if you're in a position where you can't get off the ground, I can get up and like literally do anything I want. And so it's been absolutely amazing.
Introductions, I guess. My name is Diego Diaz and I am a personal trainer, certified fascia stretch therapist, a pain-free performance specialist, and essentially my specialty is working on people who are injured and otherwise losing their quality of life due to pain and dysfunction in their motions. Which is why Andrew is here, who is one of my clients. Andrew, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Andrew. I am none of those cool things, but I'm a professional injured person. So
now, what do you do for work, actually?
I do software development. So I build teams of software developers, and it's a lot of sitting for sure.
No, so software development. How long have you been doing that?
I have been doing that for just over 5 years now. So
how old are you?
Professionally, 25.
25.
About to be 26. So
you started that when you were 20?
Yeah, in college. So
a lot of sitting.
A lot of sitting. A lot of slouching.
So then, now what ended up happening then? Because leading up to what eventually was your injury, what was happening?
A lot of kind of sedentary lifestyle in general. Was feeling very lethargic, wanted to get into the gym and start working out, and so started kind of pushing myself in the kind of physical side of things in terms of building strength and all of that. And then kind of leading up to the injury was really kind of pushing it with a very aggressive trainer that I had. And so it was actually my own personal doing. I came in here on my own and tried to pull a deadlift that was way out of my league in terms of strength required, core strength especially.
What was the workouts like? What did that look like?
The workouts were relatively well-rounded, but very much missing in kind of the core strength component of it. Not just, there were areas that were about strengthening core for sure, right? But not a lot of understanding around the concepts of tightening your core for being able to do deadlifts, right? You look at guys who's come in here with these like big belts, right? And so that they can do these crazy deadlifts. And the concept of like why you'd have a belt to do a deadlift just didn't make sense to me, right? A lot of things that we were kind of talking about post-injury in terms of building that strength to be able to almost support your back, right?
Right.
The things that you don't do normally, without that understanding of those key concepts. Those are things that I was not learning back then. So
it was just more like high repetitions then, or?
Yeah, actually low rep for the most part, but high weight.
Okay, gotcha.
High weight, low rep, which was, in part due, the injury was in part due to that.
But otherwise, so what was your injury then?
Injury was an L4, L5 disc herniation.
How big?
I remember the millimeter dimensions. It was 9 by 13 by 16, I believe.
Okay, yeah. I don't know those numbers that well, but...
it was classified as severe, and I was told by a number of different chiropractors, take that with a grain of salt, and the people that were looking at my x-rays, that it was on the very severe side, and the potential for me to have a recovery was higher because of how severe it was. Apparently you have a good reaction to that, but the potential for like long-term effects was very high. In terms of like inability to walk in the future as prior.
But like the injury itself, they said you had a high probability of recovery, or?
They said that because of how severe it was, your body generally reacts to a herniation that severe more aggressively, and you have the potential to recover, but the potential for long-term
damage,
essentially disability, was very high as well in terms of.
And I can say with how you were walking in that time, when I saw you at least, like, so what was how after the injury then, what ensued the weeks and the months afterwards?
Essentially the inability to walk. So I'll walk you through a little bit.
Real quick. I want to hear when did you realize the injury occurred?
Yes. So I performed a deadlift, just a regular. I was like sumo stance, whatever, deadlift, and immediately at that moment when I pulled the weight about halfway up, I felt this like sensation in my lower back that I had never felt before, that just felt like something like almost shifted / popped. It was a very odd sensation. But knowing I had kind of a lot of the strength in my legs and the rest of my body to be able to pull through it, I pulled through that motion and then set it down. Immediately I felt this like insane head rush and almost lightheadedness as I like stood up straight, which I'm not sure if that was just due to pulling through that weight or what, but it was it 100% felt like something was different. I couldn't tell you what. Immediately after that, I went on a road trip all the way down to Florida, which was essentially sitting the entire time.
Dang.
And that's where it started hitting, like over the course of that road trip, right? Because the herniation itself doesn't actually cause any pain. It's the irritation of the nerve that causes the real pain,
it's pressing
right?
on the nerve.
And so just sitting there for like 12 hours both directions, because we were just up north in Florida, really started digging into me. And beyond that, was still coming into the gym, still hitting all the same workouts.
Still deadlifting, or?
No, I actually requested that we stop doing deadlifts temporarily, because I thought it was just, I tweaked my back, right? I've always had lower back problems, and so it wasn't really a huge deal.
Okay, so then also you've had history of just...
I've had a very long history, and I have had a number of different x-rays that have showed that I have very degenerated discs, especially L5-S1. That are not in a great state to begin with, so this definitely didn't help. Yeah.
You got an MRI, right?
Yes, I got an MRI.
What did the doctors say?
They warned me, and I think they were trying to be nice, but they warned me that essentially it would be very unlikely that I would ever be quote unquote the same again, right? Suggestions were surgery, burning the nerves essentially, or potentially performing a microdiscectomy, which would remove the section of the disc that was essentially irritating the nerve. Those were kind of the things that were on the table for me in terms of like immediate relief, as well as steroid injections. So that was kind of like the more topical, and definitely things that I considered for sure.
Right.
Just being in that situation, being unable to walk essentially for a number of months.
Yeah, so how unable to walk for a number of months. How was living through that?
I look back on it and wonder how I took it so well, honestly. Because realistically, in terms of like the things that I like to do, I just started going out and being a lot more social, doing sports. Volleyball was kind of my thing at the time. And definitely more high impact, right? But things that I could no longer do anymore. And so thankfully, my work is something that's capable of being done from a laptop in bed if need be. So
to make that money.
That's a blessing, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of like not being completely out of, but being locked in bed for months is not exactly my idea of a great time. So.
And you told me once too that like you'd be up at like 2 a.m. from the pain, and you just ride in your car was the only thing that could alleviate it? Or?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
actually.
no, that stuck with me, and like, cause I think we've been in some dark moments like that, but when a physical pain is causing that,
yes.
Like,
so I'll walk you through a little bit what it looked like when I was at the very worst of my injury. What I had was around the bottom of my mattress, I'd take tie-down straps, the ratcheting tie-down straps, and I would loop it through my belt. It sounds funny, right? But like literally I remember when we first came in, and one of the things that would give me relief is quite literally separating my body, right? Because it took pressure off.
And just like hanging on the bar?
Yeah, hanging on a bar, anything that was decompressive, right? And so but you can't do that when you're asleep, right? You wake up in the middle of the night just in excruciating pain. Yeah. So I'd wrap it around the bottom and top of my belt, underneath my bed, and then underneath my shoulders, and quite literally winch myself apart, and it would just hold me in that position throughout the night, and that was the only way I could sleep, like literally the only way I could sleep.
How long did you do that for?
That was about a month and a half. That was only about a month and a half through the worst of it. But the driving thing...
6 weeks?
Yeah.
Bro, like 2-3 days sounds already crazy. 6 weeks?
Wow, I had to do what I had to do. Like, realistically, there was no... Like, I was downing at the worst of it. 5 ibuprofen pills, the 200 milligram liquid capsules, 5 of those 5 times a day. Like, 1 at each meal, and then 2 times in the night was the go-to. So
I
we were literally hitting at 25.
Oh, you have 25 a day?
25 ibuprofen capsules. I'm not joking. Like, this was extremely consistent. This was part of my diet. And so, but I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and a lot of times I couldn't even go to sleep to begin with. And thankfully, my car it's very low to the ground. And so it's something that you can almost lay back in, and it has heated seats. And so the only thing that would get my back to loosen up enough, because the muscle tension in my lower back was making it worse actively, would be literally to just go on hour-long drives. I'd drive down 75 every single time, the highway by us, into downtown Dallas every single night.
Did you ever run into any street racers? Is nobody trying to...
Yes.
Yeah?
And honestly,
because you drive a nice vehicle. We don't even have to say what it is, but yeah.
I have the tendency to push my limits a little bit as well. However, in those times, it was just one of the things that you tense up, right? When you start going like quickly and you have to have fast reaction times, you tense up. And so I'd run into people that were racing all the time, and something that I would partake in, let's say, allegedly in Mexico, completely AI generated. But yeah, it traditionally, right, historically, but
even then the injury didn't let you even...
Because I tried a couple of times, but it's just, you tense up in those situations. Jeez. And then just excruciating pain. And this is something that I'd have like insane like ghost sensations in my leg essentially that were due to the nerve, right? And so I'd just be sitting there like absolutely, it wasn't great. And the worst things when it flare up when you're driving is it's really kind of attention demanding, right? Like you're trying everything you can to shift yourself into a position where your lower back is not like being like impinged and like as best as possible, right? And you're going down the highway with a bunch of other people that are also going down the highway, like not exactly the best time to have your attention drawn to something else. But yeah, that really did help. That was one of the things that...
So 6 weeks of ratcheting your body down to the bed, 25 ibuprofen a day for how long?
The 25 was a solid 2.5 months, I'd say. There were 3 months that were just the worst of it. And 2.5 of those were when I started ramping up the ibuprofen very, very consistently. I mean, I had literally the biggest bottles you could buy
Costco
from
style.
It's
funny how they have those.
I had one in my car, I had one at work, and I had one at home at all times, and I would just run through them.
Oh my God.
Like, it was insane.
So when we started though, how many were you taking then? Was that 25?
Man, we started in October, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. By October, things had started ramping down a little bit. It was starting to get more manageable. I think at that point I was down to like 20. It was
20.
right on the that sounds amazing, right? But for me, I remember when we first started, I was always talking about how I was trying to ramp down my ibuprofen intake.
I remember you telling me you were taking a lot, and I'm like, let's get that pain to subside so you're not blasting ibuprofen the whole time.
Yeah, and it was a serious concern for me because when you look at studies of how ibuprofen affects your body in large quantities, the long-term effects on your liver are like pretty intense.
No, I had a client go to the ER because she took, I don't know how much she took, but basically stomach ulcers caused her to have to go. And
no, exactly.
Yeah, man, apparently those things are just not good in the gut.
Thankfully, I've always had like a pretty, I know a lot of my family has, especially on my dad's side, has a pretty long history of just migraines in general, and so they're not unfamiliar with the concept of taking a lot of pain meds. And they have a lot of stomach issues because of it. And thankfully, I used to have a lot of migraines, but I've never run into that. If I'd been in a position where I was trying to balance the stomach pain with the back pain, that would have been a lot harder to deal with for sure. But yeah,
But real quick, how would you say your daily pain level was? Like right before we started working together?
Excruciating.
I would put it 9, 10?
I would say it's unfair to put it at a 10 just because I know that there's possibility for things to hurt worse. But I would put it a very, very solid 9.5. Only because, I'm sure people say breaking your femur, right? Everybody says there are a lot of things.
live with something,
we're talking
that's
about
different.
Literally, I'm the type of person, like I was coming in here and forcing myself through movements that I was not capable of doing. This is prior to knowing that it was actually a disc herniation, because I only got an MRI a couple months into this injury and learned that it was an actual herniation. Because,
after Florida, all that. What I was told in the end was, before I got introduced to you, is that we got a guy, his back has been hurting and the current trainer was unable to basically help with that. So when we began, I filmed you walking backwards and could literally see how shifted you were intentionally making yourself in the hips just because you could not align your spine, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that, like what started alleviating the pain level when we started then? Or I don't even want to like set up the question. I just want to know, what did you think about our first week, first month working together? What did you learn out of it?
I learned a lot. And I'll walk you through kind of my mental space when I was there, for sure, because it was a very interesting time. And just to touch on, by the way, the pain level, it was something like I'd be on the ground literally and couldn't get up for like 2 hours. Like my roommate would come into the room, and because I'd try to like lay down to alleviate the pressure on my back, quite literally could not lift myself off the ground. Like this is not even like, I would try to force myself through the most excruciating pain for that. But it was a fun time to be alive. But essentially, as soon as I came in here, right, we were going through a lot of stuff that almost like aggravated it initially, right? These are the, like, in all fairness, like things I needed to do, right? I needed to be able to go through these movements and learn how to build strength around them. But it was something that aggravated initially, and so there were times in the beginning where I'm questioning, like, is this really worth it, right? And one of the reasons why I would ask you a lot of questions about like how does this work, right? What are these concepts that I'm learning? Because you talk about the ability to brace my lower back using my core strength, right? That was something that, like, I remember one of the kind of biggest questions I always had for you was, how does that not pinch it closer together? You know what I mean? You have these muscles around your core. How does that not make it worse when you flex those, right? There's just concepts that I didn't understand. And so it was confusing for sure starting out. But as soon as I started feeling the actual benefit, give it like 2-3 weeks where we were working together, and I started actually being able to understand, like, there are muscles that you don't realize are there until you work them out. You would have me go through these motions that I'd never felt these kind of the ability to target those kind of muscles. And I'd be walking through the parking garage to my, work or something in horrible pain, and be able to tense up in the way that you taught me core-wise to be able to support myself, and just, you'd feel like a relief of pain. Immediately,
it would decompress.
The decompression on the herniated disc was...
While you're walking.
Yes, while fully upright, right? Something that I never thought was possible before, right? Like, how can you... My concept is essentially, or was, that all the weight is placed on your spine, because that's the only solid part of you,
more or less,
when you're upright, right? Mm-hmm. And then kind of one of the really key things that you taught me was a concept of almost like an internal balloon, right? Like an air ride suspension, where essentially, right, the internal pressure that you create from that band around you, which is your core, is what supports you enough to not have to rely so much on the physical vertebrae in your back, right?
Yeah.
That has been absolutely fundamental for my understanding of not just recovering and getting the pressure off of that, but also lifting more, being able to do. Again. Yeah, like even this last Friday, we were doing, pretty light in comparison to like something I could potentially do otherwise, but like, doing squats and RDLs and things like that I could never do before during the injury, right? I'm really feeling that activation and the way it keeps pressure off my back, and that's something that I'm very excited to continue moving forward with.
Right.
In terms of being able to grow that strength even more. So,
but how long did it take then? From like you said, like the first 2-3 weeks, there was some aggravation of the pain for sure, and when it's as tender as it was, right? Mm-hmm. That stuff can happen. But how long did it take then after, like you said, you felt some alleviation, but then I remember you got to a point where you're actually like able to come in and actually feel like you hadn't felt any pain that whole day. You may have even forgotten to take ibuprofen?
Yes.
How long did that take?
That was a number of months.
For sure.
I believe it was, we were pushing into this year, a couple months into this year by the time that, now I had tried to come off of ibuprofen a couple of times, and it always would feel all right for the first couple of days, and then the inflammation would come back, and so I jumped back on it just because I needed it to survive, basically.
Right,
like just to be able to get through my day, right? And so by the time I was entirely off of ibuprofen was March, I believe, of this year at some point.
And when did you get injured?
The original injury was in July of last year.
Okay, July of last year.
July of 23.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, oh man, we're a year and a couple months into that. Yeah.
And we started working in October, so we're almost going into a full year, essentially, of training together. Yeah. But so like to March then, you got to where you were like feeling like your quality of life. How was that going at that point?
Yeah, I'd say by March, quality of life in terms of day to day was relatively indistinguishable from before, right? Minus the sports and kind of the more intense gym activity.
Yeah.
But in terms of being able to function, go out, meet people, have, all sorts of social interactions, go to work, that kind of thing, right? I felt it for sure, but it wasn't stopping me from anything at that point. And so it took, what was that, like 5 months or something?
Around there
of like recovery time to be able to get to that point.
Well, I mean, a big one for sure that I would like to just hit home is that re-education that you experienced.
Yeah.
Right? Because before that, and not that I taught you any sort of secretive or new concepts, but they were never actually just told to you, right? How would you describe that?
One of the biggest issues with trying to get into the fitness scene, so to speak, right? Get myself associated with that this late in life, is that I came into a lot of this in college and just knew absolutely nothing. Nothing. I didn't know how to diet. I didn't understand the concepts of like caloric deficits. I didn't understand the concepts of lifting, right? You lift big weights.
There are kids yelling in the background. I just make sure that,
Right, you lift big weights and gain muscle, right? It sounds relatively straightforward, but in terms of like the complexities around that, right? What does that actually mean? How do you not injure yourself, right? I knew nothing of that, and so kind of the re-education portion of that for me was really learning what the body does in I guess you could say like a macro view of how it works. Right? When you look at I'm doing a bicep curl, right? I need to grow my bicep. Well, okay, there's a lot more things that go into it in terms of holding yourself properly. You know, you can't just be slouching over doing half reps kind of thing. Once again, things that are very obvious to me now, right? Obvious to you as a trainer.
Well, you've seen the value
things
of
I
it.
would have ever thought of before, right? I guess I know how to be more careful now, right? It was a lot of, you go into the gym as a man in your early 20s, right? And it's big macho upper body.
You have to lift more weight.
Yeah, lift more weight, push yourself harder.
If you're not doing more each week,
right? Exactly. No, exactly. And it's so many things, so many corners are cut in that process, right? And corners that you don't even know exist. right? I didn't realize that.
That's perfect.
Like I watch podcasts. You have this guy, man, I don't even remember his name exactly. Dr. Dan, I think, bald guy. Anyways, one of his things is he always talks about how people who are, amateur lifters, essentially, they're not capable of injuring themselves because they don't, like, during a deadlift, because they don't have the strength to be able to pull that much weight.
To push that hard, right? Yeah.
I'm a phenomenal example of how that's not necessarily the case, and how that can be a dangerous mentality to have when you think, oh, I'm just starting, right? I don't have the strength to be able to injure myself, so I can just go full bore at everything, right? Very much not the case. And you build a lot of strength around certain areas that you perceive as being fundamental to the movements that you are trying to do, right? And don't realize the areas that you're completely lacking in strength. In this case, my lower back, right? But there were a lot of other areas that you could argue were, realistically, right? Obliques, abs, everything that I was missing in my entire core, right? A lot more other muscles that I'm sure you could name that I still couldn't name, but I understand the concepts behind them, right?
Right, and the crazier part is just that, so I work with people your age, but also I have 80-year-olds who I work with, and all of them, everyone in between, just has, none of them are athletes, so it goes to show that they may not know this regardless, but I've noticed it in even individuals who are very active. This idea of how to actually engage your core contextually to what you are doing, that's essentially the nuance that I teach. That's what I showed you, because the way you were able to manipulate your posture while walking, you told me how you were able to relieve that pressure. That's only for the fact that, talking about physics, if gravity goes straight down, and if your pelvis falls forward, that the fulcrum is your lumbar spine, and your L1 through 5 and your S1 is down there. And when that's being compressed, gravity is just pressing down on that. That's when enough of that time it gets pain and dysfunction, right? Which alters your movement pattern, which changes how you, and it's just a cycle. So what restabilizes that is exactly what we were just saying, when you brace your abdomen, but that takes, me saying it vocally doesn't even, it won't register to someone who's never done it, right? Could you imagine?
It didn't register to me.
When you explain to somebody, what is your trainer teaching you? You're like, it's using your body, but
tightening your core. Right. Yeah, there would be times where, as a person who feels like you can do movements, right? You come in and you tell me, hey, do a deadlift, do this, that, and the other, tighten your core, right? And that means something to me, but it doesn't mean what it's supposed to, right? In this case, right, if you said tighten your core before, I just crunch my abs, right? That doesn't actually do what I needed to do. And so for the first time after injuring myself and then coming in here and working with you, for the first time I felt like this amazing, I guess, full body connection that I never felt before, right? I feel my upper body, I feel my lower body, but I didn't feel them working together in any meaningful way as a connected machine, right? And that's one of the things that you really kind of touch on a lot in the training that we do. Something that I'm still working on, for example, is glute activation during something like a squat, right? For me, if you tell me to do a squat, that seems natural, right? I can get down, I can do a squat, I can sit back up or stand back up, right? But I don't actually focus on my glutes at all during that movement. And so when you come in and you say, hey, make sure you're using your glutes that movement, I'm like, oh wow, there's so much more I could actually be doing here, right? I have this concept of what a squat is, but it's based off of not lifting any real weight. I'm not actually supporting myself. I'm just squatting down and getting back up, right? And that's just you think you know it and you really don't. Right? You're not prepared for what that looks like with a lot of weight or, in an injury.
The details of all of that, and using a deadlift as an example, everything will work just fine, assuming your structure has the capacity to tolerate it. And all that means is you'll see somebody with a rounded back and you don't see their spine explode. Because despite the terrible technique of it all, they're still holding enough integrity. Your case, you went as far to push that integrity to the point that it created that injury, right? But like you said, you've had back pain in the past. So these are things as well that we've educated you on in regards to now understanding that it doesn't happen all at once. It's all about kind of that knowledge of how you move.
Oh yeah, and I can guarantee you that the the time that I got injured, this was a long time coming, realistically. I mean, we're talking about years and years of sitting with terrible posture. Making that even worse, coming in here and doing lifting with terrible posture, right? This is not just like a one-off moment that like, oh, I forgot to tense in this one moment. No, like this is, it surprises me now that I didn't injure it earlier, now that I know kind of the position I was in. So,
dude, same with me. I'll tell you what, like, but that brings me to a point, if the people that are listening have come this far with it, is the fact that when I first started, dude, I was incredibly clueless. The advice that was lacking, my training while I was just a young guy that didn't know a thing, eventually led me to push so hard in the things that were prescribed to me that I essentially just injured myself time and time again, right? And that was just a personal responsibility on our end to try and figure that out, right? Like if you want to be putting it on yourself. However, though, what I'm beginning to just see more and more often than not is that unfortunately a lot of people are being led astray with just very neglectful coaching, and that's a hot topic, very controversial on many ends. Quite honestly, man, like when you came into the training with me, your body was like,
it was in shambles.
It was in shambles.
And like, you know, one thing you touched on too is just the ability to let people come in and like you have this macho sense as like to all you single men, you know, who are in the gym really pushing yourself, right? This is like the sense that you have. I had it for sure, right? That like you don't want people coming in and helping you. It took me so long just to be able to say, hey, I'm willing to come in and work with a trainer. This is pre-injury, right?
Right.
I wanted to be able to say I did everything myself, right? I learned how to do all this stuff by myself. I learned how to like push myself by myself. But I realized that I wasn't in like, I just didn't know enough. And so coming in here, step one of that was working with a trainer. Step two of that was coming in and realizing post-injury, I wasn't capable of doing these things anymore. Like the fact that I'd had, like the fact that you would go and like pick up the weights for me, things like that, hand them to me while I'm on the bench or something like that, just things that like, to me it was embarrassing to begin with.
I feel
because it's just something that as a man, you don't want to be able to like, you don't want to be reliant on other people to do that for you. And so for me, it was almost something that I almost stopped coming to training. And there was a trainer that I was working with before you, and I want to shout him out, Rob here. He handed me off to you because he realized what was going on and your ability to really kind of be specific with me. But you know, in terms of like being able to come in and do those, you know, you don't want to back down from kind of bigger, the movements you were doing before, right? The things you can no longer do. You want to look like you're like falling behind. And that's one thing that like I'd come in here and I'd have to have him come in and like try and help me through these movements where I just wasn't capable of doing that anymore. And it was like a huge cut to my ego. I mean, confidence, ego were on an absolute high before that. I was looking great. I lost 60 pounds. I was blowing up muscle-wise, right? All the things you want, but then coming in here and being absolutely like put in my place, right?
Well, actually, I think you just, or go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to say like there were points where I almost like cut the training just because this is pre-working with you, just because I felt embarrassed by the fact that I couldn't do these things anymore, right? And really learning to be able to learn, ask you questions. I remember when we first started working, I used to bombard you with questions like, how is this working? What are these things?
And that was perfect.
I almost felt bad for that too, right? Because it was like nonstop every time we would come in here, but I learned so much from it, and wouldn't have it any other way realistically, because it's done an amazing amount for me.
Well, thank you for that, and that's awesome that it's come to that fruition on that. Two things though. One of them was for sure, I want to hit what you immediately just talked about with the questions you bombarded me with.
Yep.
For any trainers out there, one thing for sure is you should always encourage your clients to ask questions. Because if you can't answer one, you don't have to bullshit. Just tell them you'll find out. You don't need to have an ego about knowing everything. However, though, if you're really trying to bullshit and you know in yourself that you don't know the answer to the question, go figure it out, because you have a very moral dilemma now on that one. Because you're taking people's money and you're giving them bad advice.
And to back that up, from my perspective, right?
Sure.
There were a lot of people that I was dealing with around this time. You know, people in doctors' offices, chiropractors, all sorts of people that I would ask questions. And as somebody who likes to really dive into this, do my own research, you know, kind of understand what's going on, even in my limited capacity to understand what they were talking about. There were some people that I knew they were just saying things just to say things. And like there's just sometimes when people tell you something that, you know, maybe they believe it, in all fairness, right? But it's just misleading information for you as a person who's in that position, right? Who's actually dealing with an injury immediately, right? What people are telling you, like I had people that told me that it would never get better, right? And that nobody recovers from this kind of thing. Now, I learned that that's not the case, but people will say that as like just off the top of their head because nobody that they
worked with ever succeeded.
Yeah, or maybe they just don't have enough information to know. You know, a lot of doctors these days, they just go straight for surgery, meds, right? Things like that. And this is proof that, like, I mean, realistically, I know we talked about how back in March I was capable of doing everything without like a lot of kind of impedance, but at this point, I'd give myself a solid 95% recovery at this point, right? There are still times where I'll feel it a little bit in like more advanced movements that we're doing, but through my day-to-day, it doesn't bother me at all. I don't deal with it. It doesn't stop me from anything. I can play sports again. I can do pretty much everything. And so it's very misleading when some people, you know, especially with, you know, social media these days, anybody can say anything. And so, like you're saying, right? just having people kind of bullshit you into these things that you then believe because you have no other frame of reference, right? Especially in a time where you're very susceptible to what people say because you're really struggling.
It's
like
nothing on you.
It's a terrible time to come in and work with people that are just not willing to learn more. I mean, one of the things that actually really impressed me with you, and I'll just kind of throw this out there, is you were always learning more. You were always telling me about, like, even if you didn't know necessarily the answer to something specific, I'd come in the next day that we had training and you'd done the research on it, or even just kind of going out on your own and doing more training. You were getting certs for pretty much everything.
Arizona, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one I'm kind of thinking of right now. You were always going off and learning more, coming back, teaching me more about that. Like, this is really kind of understanding of, like, there's never a point where you know everything, right? There's always this like amazing amount of knowledge that you can gain by just being open-minded enough to put yourself in a position to learn more, right? And that's something that for me, as somebody who dislikes not seeing that in people, especially the people that I trust to be able to get me through this, that's something for me that was really kind of a game changer in terms of being able to recover and trust you and your ability to help me recover.
And that was a big thing, right? Like, because I appreciated that you wanted to ask questions, and I could also appreciate where you had it on a base, you were asking those questions partly out of like self-preservation.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, how much does this guy know? Because I am fucked up right now.
Yes. Very much so. I mean, realistically, I never had aside from like, didn't know you at all, first day on, right? I didn't have any reason to doubt anything that you said, right? Realistically, you knew infinitely more than me at all given times, and I very much understood that from the get-go. But there were a lot of people that, like, I really just didn't feel that,
your
sense
position,
of security. Yeah,
your position was like, totally warranted.
I don't want to put my future in the
Yes.
hands of somebody who's just going to tell me something offhand that injures me even more.
Yeah.
And you know, that was something that I was very much at risk of in that time. So
yeah, you didn't have time to then try the next thing and hope it works.
And one of the things that was on the table for me was I was able to get health insurance, and there was always a possibility where I could go essentially get set up with a physical therapist that was like on, you know, part of my plan or whatever under the coverage that I have, right? And one of the things that scared me the most about that was knowing how much you actually knew about the recovery process and how little I felt other physical therapists do. Like,
Have you been with PTs already, or?
I talked to a few. I never actually started with any because I stuck with you through this whole process. One of the things that I feel a lot of other PTs struggle with, and this is, there's nobody in specific, right? But you're sent there by your health insurance, right? And they have you run through like some mobility stretching, right? We did stretching too, but we did a lot of strength training, around areas that needed strength, right? That's not something that I felt confident other people would do. And so that's one of the reasons why I stuck with you through all of this, is just, it was worth it to not just recover from this, but be able to not re-injure myself.
Dude, yeah, the re-education aspect of it, because like I train older people, and I'm fortunate enough to have seen a window of perspective from individuals born generations before us.
Yeah.
And dude, the mentality is just to like hurt. That's just what it is. Like, go in and hurt. Like, no, don't do that anymore. No pain, no gain is the worst thing ever. No pain. Like, but even then, I'll get flack for that, I'm sure. But it's just in the end, people are going in there like, it needs to hurt.
Yeah.
And yeah, deadlifts hurt, and I'm doing 12 reps. It's gonna hurt. But my back feels like it's exploding. That's so. What hurt? Sets of 12, or my back is about to explode like on rep 10? Like what? So there's exercise hurt, and then there's pain hurt, right?
To that specifically, I will say, if I find somebody that I trust in this case, like you, to be able to say, hey, okay, there are certain things we need to push ourselves in just so that we can get to the point of recovery, right? If there were places I wasn't willing to push myself in the recovery process, 100% it would have taken longer. However, I will say, I had some massage therapists that I was working with that put me through some like very aggressive stretching in that time, and I had the same mentality, right? I was like, oh, no pain, no gain, right? I have to stretch this out. To me, I thought it was just like a muscle issue, like I pulled something and I needed to stretch it because it was tensed out or tensed up. I was literally out of commission for, there was one period where it was just 2 weeks where I literally basically couldn't move, solely because of the fact that I had somebody that was stretching me really hard. I didn't realize I had the herniation at this point, right?
Oh,
and so I had something that was stretching me really hard, and I walked out of the office unable to do anything, right? And so that's, in this case, like literally the receptionist at the front, she was actually the manager of the location. She was like, are you okay? Because I like remember how I would come in here bent over. It was worse because this was like immediately post stretching.
Did you go to like a stretch lab or something?
Almost 45 degrees. What's that?
Did you go to a stretch zone or stretch lab?
No. I have.
It was just
some massage places that I would go to, and this is pre-injury, right? And they had some guys that were just more kind of sports recovery oriented, that did like a lot more deep tissue stuff, which I love when I can handle it.
Right.
But when they're like coming in there and stretching you, and they're like, no, you need to do this. This is what you need to do to recover. And I would be out, like completely destroyed.
You said you came out of it like almost bent 90 degrees?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Shit.
Literally, like, it was, I'm holding myself up on the counter to talk to the person behind the counter to like, it was a fun time. But that's kind of the alternative, like, those are the experiences that I had with people that thought they knew better. And also, as a frame of reference, because once again, I didn't do physical therapy with another physical therapist, but my mom, who is unfortunately on the other side of the globe, otherwise she'd be right here with us, with you actually, because I would make sure she came to you. She fell and herniated and fractured. She fractured a disc and fractured a vertebrae and herniated disc in her low back as well. And so she's been recovering from that, and she's dealt with a lot of people that will do like really intense massage that will really aggravate it, or will try and stretch her, like physically stretch her, and she's a very small woman, 4'11", stretch her in these like things that are supposed to help you. Once again, like you said, right?
Yeah.
No pain, no gain. Push through it. Make sure you do all of these things, and she'll just be out for literally months. And she unfortunately has not. She's been recovering, but she's not recovered like I have.
That's fast.
Now, all fairness, she's a little bit older than I am. But,
right.
But I guarantee you, she was in here, she was building that strength, not just stretching, because everybody talks about mobility and stretching, but building that strength like you have taught me to be able to do, to actually physically recover from this. That's kind of fundamental for me in this case.
We touched on my last question, but essentially one thing I want to like hit home then overall, which is going to be a big part of, I think, as I grow this podcast more, is understanding what fascia is, because it's when I educated myself on it and went through the certifications and just have done incessant reading on it, it's that North Star of understanding what connective tissue is and does and its nature in the body that allowed me to apply that information to how we trained you out of that injury. Because the way you explained, you learned how to do, I think you said a plank, but like you felt your whole body in it.
Yeah.
That's connective tissue. That's what allows you to feel that sensation.
Yeah.
Right. And anytime we get it or we're putting ourselves in positions that are unregulated or in a dysfunctional pattern, if I leave myself like this, for an hour straight, there's going to be rigidity out of that to come out of it, and that's happening on a micro level, hour to hour, and also year to year.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a concept I just want to hit home to wrap it up, though, essentially. But is there anything else you want to mention on that?
I will mention briefly for that specifically. That's not something that I ever understood before, right? There were even concepts of like core strength and all that I didn't understand. That's something that nobody ever touched on fascia, right? And even you would talk to me pretty often when I'd be doing these movements, like why am I like hitting these limits where it doesn't feel like there's pain, right? But we're hitting these physical limits that I can't go past. You talk about kind of the function of fascia and how that can get, essentially you kind of have to break through that, right, as you're recovering. And I would feel that, right? We do the mobility exercises and I really feel that kind of remobilization of, you understand it more than me, right?
No,
but you were the one that taught
know.
me from the get-go, right? And I kind of look at the full body thing like an IKEA cabinet. You ever put together those IKEA cabinets where they're like super, like shelves, right? They're super flimsy, and then you put those crossbars on the back, and they become rock solid, right? They're just these little metal strips. They're almost like a stabilization, right? And they just cross. That's how I feel with my body now, right? And that's one thing that's just what you taught me. Like, I couldn't imagine living without that. So it's been a really great experience. It's been,
dude, I'm happy to hear that.
Informational for me, and I'm glad to be able to walk again. Like, go to this guy. Really, if you're in a position where you can't get off the ground, I can get up and like literally do anything I want. And so it's been absolutely amazing.
And it's having that perspective because you lost it at a certain point.
Yeah, come on. I would never have like come in here and been like, oh yeah, I need to learn all of this if I hadn't have had all of that pulled away from me.
No, looking at you, no one ever assumed like, he can't walk. You know what I mean? Like,
no, exactly. Yeah. It's been absolutely phenomenal. So
absolutely, man.
Sir, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Hell yeah.
All right.
Well, that's a wrap on that. How do you feel about it?
Feels great.